Are we at a point in corrections where we cannot police ourselves anymore? Can we trust corrections management above the warden on up? Can we trust the office of the Inspector General to do the right thing? Do we have people in management that are corrupt? Do we have people in the office of the Inspector General who like to push things under the rug to keep things nice and smooth? Hi, I'm Gary York, True Prison Stories. Please subscribe if you like this video. Just on January 30th, 2019, we had a Florida prison inspector arrested and put into the Waukulla County Jail for perjury. He was assigned an investigation, and according to the arrest affidavit, which does not have all the details, he went to the witness's home or residence and then lied about it. Not sure 100% about the details of why he had to go to the witness's home, because when an office of the Inspector General conducts an investigation, at least here in Florida, the interview must be done at the place of employment of the witness or suspect, or in the office of the Inspector General. So I'm not sure if this was a stalking incident or what, but he was charged with Florida Statute 837.012 for perjury and is now in jail. In 2015, we had several prison inspectors come forward, I think about 4, and say that the office of the Inspector General in Florida was brushing complaints under the rug of abuse of inmates and other things going on in the Florida prison system. And they actually went forward and talked to the state senate about it and gave their testimony, and they were demoted and moved for whistleblowing. So I don't know who we can trust anymore. I'm not saying this is the same as it is when you see a correctional officer is arrested for smuggling drugs in a prison. That's one correctional officer. Not all officers are that way. It's the same with prison management above the warden. They're not all corrupt. It's the same with prison inspectors. They're not all bad. The majority are honest, hardworking people. But another example, we had a Florida Secretary of Corrections arrested and pled guilty and did 8 years in federal prison with his right-hand man, who did 4 years in federal prison for embezzlement from the inmate canteen funds, and he was also covering up incidents that were occurring in the state of Florida. Back when I was a prison inspector back in the day, we woke up and heard that we had lost a prison inspector up in North Florida area. She and her husband were arrested for growing and cultivating marijuana in their home. Talk about a low blow to the Inspector General's office. That makes everybody think that all the inspectors are involved in something bad. Same thing happens when a correctional officer is arrested. So, can we police ourselves anymore? The inspector that was cultivating the marijuana got caught through the electric company, noticing that the electric bill was going sky high, and then the local law enforcement there did some undercover work, and thank God they busted her. We don't want anybody like that. Honest officers came up to me and said, "Thank you for busting that officer, bringing those drugs in. We really appreciate that." Honest officers don't like corrupt officers, and honest prison inspectors don't like corrupt prison inspectors. I was so glad they hauled her butt away and put her in jail. This prison inspector in 2019 that committed perjury, if he did commit perjury, and if it turns out to be true, then he needs to be sent down the road. What happened in 2015 is 4 prison inspectors came out and said several, and I have to read it to make sure it's correct, several current and former prison inspectors directed their criticism at the Inspector General's office, saying that the Inspector General's office in 2015 would suppress criminal charges and interfere with investigations of higher ranking people. higher ranking, not the lower ranking. And I'm going to tell you something right now. When I left the prison inspector's office in Florida, I was not happy because Secretary James Crosby, who went to prison for 8 years, was our secretary. The prior two secretaries of corrections were honest men, Harry K. Singletary and Mr. Moore, and then we had a military man come in, a retired colonel, and they were really, in my opinion, honest, and everybody was fair game. If you were corrupt, doesn't matter what your rank was. And then we get this James Crosby who wanted to protect the higher ups, which, and I believe these guys are telling the truth. I mean, why would four prison inspectors put themselves in jeopardy to report this? And Secretary Crosby went to prison. I went to the sheriff's office. I was interviewed by the Jacksonville FBI on what I knew, and you know, I could only tell them what I'd witnessed at events when Secretary Crosby was out dancing and prancing and promoting people on the spot and going out with other women in corrections, and favor for a favor type thing is what I explained, that I assumed what was going on, but I could only tell them what I saw, not what I assumed. And I decided it was time for me to get the heck out of the Florida Department of Corrections before I get a target on my back. And I went to a sheriff's department here in Florida, and thank goodness I did. I did another 12 years with a very good, honest sheriff who is against corruption. Doesn't matter what the rank was. If you were wrong, you were wrong, and he had some couple of high-ranking people in his department that he put away, and that's the way it should be, folks. If you're a Secretary of Corrections or a police chief or the sheriff, you should not be trying to protect anyone when the wrongdoing. Why would you want to do that anyway? It makes no sense to me. If somebody is corrupt and doing something wrong, you want to get rid of them to make your agency look better. That makes you look good as a leader, not covering up. And I get a little concerned when I see all these things happening. You know, I've heard a lot from the folks out in New York. I'm a Florida guy, so I can't testify for New York, but I've seen some of the comments made by a lot of the New York officers about the Office of the Inspector General, a lot of things they don't like. And you know what? The more I hear, the more I'm wondering, you know, what's going on over there. But I can only speak for Florida, and we've had our issues here. Here's another quote. Prison inspector / law enforcement officer who works in the Inspector General's office said that the atrocities he has observed on the streets in America in comparison to the human rights violations occurring in the Florida prison system are quite different. So he is saying we're having a lot of human rights violations going on in the Florida prison system, and they're being covered up. This was in 2015. We no longer have the same Secretary of Corrections. We have a new one. So let's give the new Secretary of Florida Corrections a chance to prove that they can make things a lot different down here in Florida. We had a Senate committee chairman, Republican Senator Greg Evers, who got involved in that incident and wanted the investigation to be conducted of the Florida Department of Corrections. And he did not want any cover-ups going on, which is good. That's what we want. And we need sometimes people like Senator Greg Evers to get involved, because not to come in and cover up, but to come in and clean up and make sure that nobody is covering up corruption in prisons. Now, another thing that goes on is in Wisconsin, a friend of mine is finding that management up there is doing him wrong. He's a 20-year captain, and he since retired, went out the door unhappy with the way they're doing things, and I can't get into details of that, but there's some incidents of the investigation that was conducted internally missing a lot of witness statements. Now, folks, that's another thing. As an internal affairs investigator, as a prison inspector, whatever you want to call them, you can't just pick and choose. You can't go out and do 20 interviews and say, oh, look, these 10 statements fit the way I like it, and I'm going to put only these 10 statements in, and I'm going to omit all these other statements. Well, you know what? To me, that falls under perjury. That falls under official misconduct. That falls in if you should be fired. You should be terminated, maybe even criminal charges. You know, omitting information in an investigation to twist it your way is criminal. And if that happens, and I don't have no reason to believe this, why this captain is making false allegations. I believe he's telling the truth. I've talked to him on the phone, and he's very sincere about what's going on, and he has a great record of 20 years, and now why all of a sudden when he sees something that went wrong, when he sees higher management that did something wrong, and he complains about it, oh, now the tide has turned and they want to go get him. We need to stop that, folks. You know, it says in most of our statutes and most of our directives and most of our institutional policies, you're supposed to report misconduct. And then when you do, you get shit on. Excuse my language. That's going to deter people from getting rid of the bad apples. It's the bad apples that make us look bad, and management and even the Office of the Inspector General in some cases apparently wants to cover it up. Where is the mindset? I don't understand this at all. Why wouldn't you move swift, take swift action, put the axe on these bad apples and get rid of them? It'll make you look better. It'll make the agency look better. It'll make the public respect us more. Just like the sheriff that I worked for 12 years down here in Florida. I'll tell you what, you did wrong. You were in the jail. We had 2 of them. You were in one of those jails in ISO, up by the control room. Since you were a former employee of the sheriff, we couldn't put you in general population. But it didn't matter what your rank was. It didn't matter. We had some high ranking all the way down to civilian employees at the sheriff's office to just detention deputies that were in there for doing wrong. But what we came out in the paper the very next day, sheriff does internal investigation, arrest Sergeant so-and-so, arrest Captain so-and-so, arrest, or fires Major so-and-so, or fires the chief. Well, what does that tell the public? That tells the public you're an honest leader. You want to run an honest agency, and you want to fight corruption, and you do not want corruption within your agency. And I am excited about this topic, and maybe you can tell by the way I'm talking, because it does bug me, and it's got to stop. And no, we don't have, not all prison inspectors are on the up and up. Are all prison inspectors of good moral character? Man, I wish I could say 100% yes, they are. But I gave you some examples of the inspector and her husband growing marijuana in their home, cultivating it. I gave you an example of a 2019 inspector committing perjury. I gave you an example of a Wisconsin internal affairs investigator who is alleged, and that's being investigated now, of omitting statements. If you do 20 interviews for an investigation, you better put them all in there and attach them as an exhibit. You don't have to compound in your typed investigation everything. Just put 2 or 3 sentences of what everyone has said and put them as an exhibit, and let someone else in the courtroom decide, or hopefully you have honest leaders way up above and they can decide. But if you omit those 20 affidavits, or if you omit some of those affidavits, when the report goes up the chain or ends up in a courtroom somewhere and you don't have those sworn statements, that could change the entire outcome of the investigation, and that's corruption. That's official misconduct. So if you want to be an investigator investigating your own people, you better be of the troops and for the troops. Put every statement in there. Just a few things I want to talk about, and I'd love to hear if you think your management above the warden is on the up and up. if you believe your office of the Inspector General or your internal affairs or however your state handles those type of things, if they're on the up and up. And I would hope to hear that they are. And if you have had a few bad incidents, I hope they got those bad apples out of there. You don't want anybody investigating you that will commit perjury, that will omit statements, that will cover up things, or that will turn the gun on you when you turn in corruption, and then next thing you know, they turn around and attack you. We don't want any of that. So let me know what you think. I've told you a little bit about my thoughts on it. Can we still police ourselves? Or is it time to find outside agencies to come in and investigate us, people that don't know anything about us? That's one thing that worries me a little bit also. If they don't know anything about corrections, they don't know what to look for, and it's not their fault. You know, I was in the military police, working the road the entire 8 years in the military police, doing traffic accident investigations, bar fights, and so forth. But I wasn't on the streets in the United States as a police officer or a sheriff's deputy. I went to corrections right after the military. So all I know is 28 years worth of corrections. So I'm not going to go outside of my arena and go do an internal affairs investigation on a street cop for something, because until I do that job, I may not be able to depict the correct avenue of approach or the right way to do this case. So I'm a little worried about that. I'd like to have a balance of law enforcement corrections, which many states now are combining. If you're a correction officer, you are now a law enforcement officer. Many states are now doing the dual certification, so that when you come out of the academy, you're dual certified. You're a correctional officer and a law enforcement officer. That's great. And that's what we need. We need someone with law enforcement and corrections experience to conduct these investigations in the correction system, I believe. But my question is, do we need an office of the Inspector General, or do we need a whole outside agency? They can still hire people with corrections experience. Let me know what you think. Gary York, True Prison Stories. Please subscribe if you like this video.